Thank you for joining us. Today, I am joined by Mr. Christopher Blair, the 2020 Louisiana Sportscaster of the Year. Congratulations.
Well, thanks, Joe. And you can call me Chris. I think my mother calls me Christopher, but I'm good with Chris. That sounds good. Frankly, you can call me anything you like.
Sounds good, Chris. I appreciate it. So, I wanted to learn a little bit about what made you want to get into sports. Was it just the love of the game, or is it just, you felt like you wanted to hear your voice heard?
Well, I think it was because growing up in sports, I grew up in a small town in Eastern Kentucky. And sports was big. Basketball obviously was big growing up. But played all three of the major sports: basketball, baseball, and football. And then, of course, like many of us, my ceiling for an athlete, I hit that pretty soon. But you still love the game. And I grew up in a broadcasting family. That's what our family did for a living. And I didn't think much about it when I was younger. It was just something Dad did. But as I got a little older into high school and then into college, I had the opportunity to help him fill in for some of his stations when he needed somebody to do sidelines or play-by-play for basketball. And of course, having played it, having somewhat of a knowledge of the sport, it felt like it was a natural thing to do. And then it wasn't until sometime later that I got my first check from his company, and I wondered what the check was for. And he said that was for doing games, which that's the first time I really put two and two together. I just thought everybody that did games did it because they love the game and they love being around that type of atmosphere. So once I made that connection, then later on after college, I just decided, that's what I wanted to do. And plus, growing up, my dad's heroes, which in a way became my heroes without me even realizing it, were some of the voices that I listened to for games. In my house, my mother would watch the television games, but my dad would typically have, for example, the University of Kentucky, if they were playing basketball or football, somewhere in the house, the radio would be on with the great Kaywood Ledford. And so very early on, I kind of gravitated towards the radio voices. And then as I got older, got exposed to Kaywood Ledford and, just a number of guys. John Ward at Tennessee, we could pick up when I was a kid. Then we moved to South Carolina. I knew Bob Fulton, listened to Bob Fulton, longtime voice of the Gamecocks. Later on, had a chance to work with Jim Phillips, who was the longtime voice of the Clemson Tigers. So those guys were my heroes. And I enjoy listening to games to this day, really on the radio or via streaming, more so than I watch them on television. And that's just kind of a habit that I formed when I was young, probably because of my father. And that's kind of what I wanted to be in it. When I was old enough to realize what a job was, I wanted to represent and be involved at a major institution, a state institution with a rabid fan base, passionate fan base. And, I've been lucky over the last 20 years to do that.
Absolutely. That sounds incredible. It seems like you've had a really good career path, and it seems like you have had a lot of mentors that have really helped you into becoming a great sportscaster. Because if you look at, there's a lot, the sportscasting business, it's hard to, get into, because it just seems like, you're the craft, you have to be like, it just seems like you can't just jump right to calling, the NBA or right off the gate. It's always about building up and like working your way up. So like, I guess was what your first job, it sounds like you were with this company, and like, tell me more about that.
My first job?
Yeah. First job out of college.
Well, I was a program director for a small AM station. Actually, it was an AM FM combo, but when I graduated college, I got a chance to be the program director and a salesman for 1450 WCRS, the voice of Greenwood, South Carolina. And at that time, the AM station was playing music of your life. So you could hear everything from Frank Sinatra to Dean Martin, James Taylor, Carly Simon, basically the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, which was, quite an education. Although I'm a big music fan, it was a really good education for me at the age of 22, 23 to be out there, not only selling that station, but also programming it to a certain degree. And then by doing that stuff Monday through Friday, I convinced my boss that if I did my job well enough Monday through Friday, handling the voice of Greenwood, that I could do the football games for the high school on Friday night. That was kind of a give and take. He was not a big sports guy. But if there were revenue tied to it, he would listen. So that's what we did. So I started doing Greenwood High School football regularly. I want to say around 1997, 1998, and did that for a number of years. And in that town, it was a big deal. Greenwood Eagle football was huge, and they were state contenders every single year. So I got to kind of hone my craft and learn on the fly, if you will, calling games every Friday night. And, again, that just, reasserted my desire to continue on this career path. And I tell people all the time, what I learned those 5-6 years calling Greenwood High School football isn't a whole lot different as far as the X's and O's, if you will, than what I do now across the street at Tiger Stadium for LSU football. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. And so those reps that I got, those number of years and those Friday nights, lugging the equipment up to the press box and setting everything up, I think, did me a good service into what I do now with a team full of people that put together the LSU football broadcast on Saturday in the fall.
Incredible. That's awesome. You see, and recently for LSU, you guys were just the national champions, not past year, but the year before that. And that must have been a crazy year with, Joe Burrow leading the Tigers. And how does it feel? Or were there a lot of nerves calling a national championship like that?
You are anxious. I tell people all the time that, the opening game every year, whether it's at Tiger Stadium, this year it will actually be in Los Angeles against UCLA, which is pretty incredible to call a game there. But regardless, I always have a little bit of anxiety. I think there's some people I know that probably don't, and boy, good on them. But I always tend to be a little anxious until it's, they tell players all the time, you get nervous or you get anxious until that first hit, that first snap of the football, you get hit in the mouth, and then suddenly everything settles down and slows down. That's kind of how I feel about what I do. I mean, I hate going to press boxes 2 hours before a game. Mostly because I've got all my work done well in advance. So I'd much rather just show up, sit down, and call the game. Walking around in the bullpen, so to speak, waiting for the game to start is what helps add to that anxiety. But once the game starts and we get through the first series, you kind of get locked into what you're supposed to do and working with your partners on the air and working with the producers, that you kind of forget all of that. And then suddenly the game ends and you think, wow, what was I all worked up about? This was what I prepared to do. So, I think it didn't really affect us, I don't think, during that 2019 run. Of course, you had no idea when we started that year that you were going to go on to 15-0 and Joe Burrow was going to do the great things that he did, and that team would go on to do some great things. But as each week went along, you kind of thought, wait, we're one step closer to really having one of the best years in the history of certainly modern college football. So once we got to the SEC championship game, once we got to the semifinals in the Peach Bowl, and then eventually in New Orleans at the Superdome, it was, another game. And I know coaches tell the teams that all the time. Hey, it's another game. This is another opponent. It's no different than the one you played 4 weeks ago as far as how you prepare for it and go out and execute. So really, there wasn't any more anxiety in 2019 than there was in 1997 or 1998 when I did the first Greenwood High School football game. And it won't be any different to opening the season against UCLA here in a couple of months.
Interesting. I never really thought of it like that. I just said, sometimes I think, well, when you've been doing this business for a while, you have your routine you go through, and just to know that it still hits with your anxiety and getting nervous for a game, maybe you're thinking, oh, I don't want to mess up. But it's also like going one of those things like go with the flow. And it's like, if you make a small mistake, just don't dwell on it. Just, continue what you're doing.
I think there's a good thing to having a little anxiety. It keeps you awake, keeps you on your toes. but you have to be able to manage it in a way that it doesn't paralyze you.
Mhm.
And again, that's kind of what I said when we get started and that first drive happens and things are moving at such a quick pace, that you don't even have time to think about being anxious or being nervous. You're just kind of in the mode. And, I kind of hope that airline pilots are that way. I kind of hope that surgeons are that way, that, going into it, they understand the importance of it and the reverence that is needed. But then once they're in it, they've trained, they've prepared, they are ready to do the job. So that's just the way I approach it.
Truly incredible. Truly incredible. One of my last questions I want to ask is, what advice would you give college graduates that want to get into the sportscasting business?
It's well, it goes back to what you said earlier about networking. Asking questions, reaching out to people that you admire, who you think does a good job in whatever that is, whether that's hosting a sports show, whether that's doing sports talk radio, whether that's anchoring the 6 o'clock sports, or calling play-by-play or anything. I think if you reach out to people that you admire and you appreciate their work, I think if you do it in a solid and professional approach, most people I've found will be willing to at least reach back out to you. I've been blessed over the years for a number of people that I've admired that have taken time to help me, taken time to answer questions. People that are in the business, people that used to be in the business, people that have retired. I'm very grateful for some of the things that they took their time to kind of give me some constructive criticism. But I think networking, getting to know people is key. And the second part, and I don't know if one's more important than the other, is repetition. I tell people, I run into students here at LSU who want to get into TV play-by-play or radio play-by-play, and they'll ask me what they should start doing. And I typically start with telling them they need to go find a place to call games. That could be summer league baseball. That could be semi-pro football. That could be a local high school that currently doesn't have coverage. You can take, nowadays with the technology, you can, if you get permission from the school and work with the school, you can, do a live stream video and call the action. Any opportunity you can get to get hands-on experience, I think is key, because if you've got that hands-on experience of learning how to wire all this stuff up and to use all of this stuff, and then you have a network of people, eventually I think somebody's going to have a need for something and somebody and some talent. And if you've got that preparation, you've got those reps down, and you've got some contacts, when they think they need somebody, more than likely you may be coming to the top of the list, and that gives you that opportunity. And then once you get that opportunity, you have to make the most of it. So I think networking and repetition is the key. As I said earlier, the games I did at Greenwood High School on a small AM station in Greenwood, South Carolina, doing those games, those hundreds of games that I did over the years, including state championship games, that prepared me for what I'm doing now, all these years later at LSU. And without those reps, I think, I'd put it this way, I'd be a lot more anxious showing up at Tiger Stadium having not have those reps under my belt. So networking and repetition, I think, is the key. And for sportscasting, and for that matter, any profession you want to go into.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for, chatting with me. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you and learning more about the sportscasting business from a different perspective.
Well, Joe, thanks for having me on. And I want to thank everybody, at the Sports Writers and Sportscasters Association. They do a great job. And they do a lot for, young people who want to get into this business. And so can't thank you enough for having me on, and hope to get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening and watching.